welcome to Village in Motion. It's November the 11th, it's Veterans Day, and it's kind of getting cool outside, so stay inside and watch the show today. It's all about wine, and we got Jim Coulter with us, who is our wine guru here at Green Spring. And how are you doing today, Jim?
Doing great. Thank you very much, Clint.
Good.
Nice to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. And what's new in wine?
Well, there's an interesting thing that's going on in wine lately that I really hadn't heard much about. There was a nice article in the Washington Post a few weeks ago about it. Basically, people are trying to collect grape varieties like they collect stamps or coins. They try to drink their way through the entire 26-letter alphabet by drinking wines whose grapes, or predominant grapes, start with letters of the alphabet. A for Albarino and B for whatever, and so forth, all the way down to whatever grape variety starts with Z, which I don't know. But it's an interesting concept, and it's a great way to experience new and different wines.
Yes.
Of course, you end up with a lot of strange wines that you end up drinking. Apparently, a lot of the letters of the alphabet, you're going to have to get wines from Central Europe or Eastern Europe or Greece or Turkey. I know one letter of the alphabet that I thought would be hard is X, but there's a Xarello grape from Spain that's in their sparkling wines. So if you want to drink a Spanish cava, you can cross X off of your list. X of your list. Yeah, but it's. I guess it's a fun thing, and if you go to restaurants and you read the wine list, if you want to try something that begins with a Q or an R, or R would be Riesling, you get that anywhere. But there's a lot of different ways to try new and different things, and that's one that some guy came up with as an idea, and it's becoming more and more popular as people try to cross all the things off their bucket list of wines they want to drink. Not something that I would be interested in doing, and I wouldn't recommend it to any of our residents just because it's probably going to be too expensive to find some of them, and you'd probably have to travel long distances in some cases to experience it. It's probably not worth it. Well, on the other hand, if you ever find yourself in Tasmania or Central Uzbekistan or something, you might want to try the local
see
wines.
What they got, right?
First of all, it might be safer than drinking the water in some places.
So rather than having a bucket list, you could have a bottle list.
Exactly, and nothing wrong with that.
All right. In regards to wines, I mean, there's a variety of wines, a number of wines. I was most amazed when I read that article in the Post. Over 1,000 different wines. I mean, grapes. I mean,
yeah, I would guess that there's probably more because you remember that not every grape variety lends itself to making good wine. So there's probably 3,000 or 4,000 different grape varieties, some of which may not have even been discovered yet. In the middle of the Central African Republic, in a small village somewhere, they may be growing grapes that the DNA of which is different from grapes anywhere else. But it's like any other area of science, grape varieties and like potato varieties and pepper varieties, and so I'm sure they fascinate some scientists someplace. And a lot of the places like UC Davis has a wine school. There's probably some professor there who's writing a big, thick tome that he's going to publish someday that list all the grape varieties in the world and what kind of wine they make with them and so forth. Might make fun reading from the library.
Well, I just thought about this. I mean, not only are there all these different grapes out there, but there are now people who are doing an all-natural wine process, right? I mean,
where they have as little interaction with the wine. For years, people have used natural yeast that just floats around the vineyards naturally in fermenting the grapes. And some of them have admitted that they make quite nasty wines, but on others, and natural is is also a kind of a fad now. A lot of restaurants now are going with local produce instead of importing stuff from around, and they make their menu up around that. And that's here in Virginia. There are several, well-regarded restaurants that are doing the locavore, I think they call it, where you're buying and eating local ingredients, and that's really helping the sale of Virginia wines, because if they're using Virginia products in their food, well, they want to have some Virginia wines at least on their wine list.
Well, speaking of Virginia wines are really increasing in number, right?
Yes.
And becoming more popular throughout the United States.
Yep, we're up to number 5 in the country now in the amount of acreage that we have. There's over 3,173 acres last year, which puts us number 5 in the country and compares quite favorably with California, which only has 608,000 acres. But of course, they produce 95% of the wine.
I was just going to say, you can certainly tell where the producers are, right?
Yeah, but Virginia has their production of wine is 5,500 and something cases of wine, which is up 34% at 2015 over the 2010 number. So they can't do the math in my head because I was never that good at math, but I don't know what 34% less than that would have been, but probably around 400,000 acres, cases or something like that.
But what it really shows, though, there is a increased purchasing of wines, of Virginia wines?
It's a lot of it is the younger, the millennials that they're called. The young people are interested in eating and drinking local, rather than going to French restaurants or Chinese restaurants. Or if they want French food, they'll go to a French restaurant that uses Virginia ingredients in it. Unless they live in Pennsylvania, in which case they're getting Pennsylvania ingredients in their food. But it's a good way to keep the local economy pumped up. And Virginia wineries last year put $750 million into the state's economy.
A significant amount.
Between taxes and salaries paid to employees and road taxes and gasoline tax, whatever they're spending their money on. So that's $750 million into the Virginia economy, so they're making a significant contribution to the state.
One of the things, I don't know if everybody realizes or not, you can have a winery without actually growing your own grapes.
Yeah, and that's one of the concerns, or not a concern, but it's one of the problems that the Virginia wineries are having now, because as I said, there's 3,000 something acres of grapes planted in Virginia, but a large part of those are not on winery property, but they're farmers that are growing grapes and selling their grapes to the wineries. And you get some of the wineries some of the larger wineries that have a large number of acres are growing grapes, and they'll use the best grapes or a certain kind of grape that they're growing for their own wines, and they'll sell the grapes to other wineries. One of the things they pointed out in there was that Trump Winery down near Charlottesville in the past had been selling 50 tons of grapes off to other wineries. Now they're keeping all those 50 tons of grapes and using them in their own wines because they're selling more of their wine now. So we may see a time when Virginia, I know some of the Virginia wineries now are using grapes from Pennsylvania or North Carolina that they buy and have brought in. I know there was a winery my wife and I visited in Indiana years ago where all of their grapes came from California. They'd have the grapes crushed there, and then a tank truck would bring the juice to Indiana, and then they'd make the wine.
I was going to ask you about that. So if I'm a farmer, I grow grapes. I mean, I don't have a winery. I grow grapes to sell to a winery. Do I only sell whole grapes, or do I have to crush them? And then
it depends. It depends on the winery. If the winery has their own crushing facilities, and so they may want to buy the grapes right from the field. And a lot of wineries will have contracts with growers. I know Will and Edna Brill's relative in California would do that. He was growing grapes, and he would sell them to wineries. And a lot of the wineries will have a vineyard manager that they send around to the different growers that are going to make sure the grapes are being grown the way they want them, that they're properly pruned, and so forth.
Oh, okay.
So there's a big business around just growing grapes and providing them to the wineries. And they have in California, especially where they have so many wineries, they've got businesses that have tractor trailers with crushing equipment and so forth, and they'll send a tractor trailer around to small wineries or to farms, to crush the grapes, squeeze the juice, put it into a tank, and then take the tank wherever. And the small wineries can have the guy come and show up and crush the grapes for them and pump the juice into their tanks, and then the guy leaves and goes to the next winery down the road and crushes their grapes for them.
Well, in the Midwest, there's a lot of farmers who will hire a company to come in and harvest their fields and bale their hay and those kinds of things. So the same type.
Yeah, so they don't have to buy a $300,000 piece of equipment that sits idle 10 months a year.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of businesses now that have picked out niches like that where they're filling a need. Well,
in Virginia, there's a number of wineries. Do you have an idea of how many do we have now?
285 at the last count.
Okay.
That was that was the end of last year.
Okay.
Whenever they had to file their tax pay, I wouldn't be surprised if this spring a couple of more didn't open up.
So we'll probably have over 300 here very shortly.
Yeah, wouldn't be long.
Yeah. And we have a number of those, as I mentioned earlier, that do not have their own wineries.
Exactly.
Their own presses and everything.
Yeah, and that's you get a fairly large Veritas winery here in Virginia. It makes 23,000 cases of wine a year at 12 bottles a case. That's not a whole lot of wine based on the scheme of of the giant California wineries, but I think they're the fourth or fifth largest in the state at 23,000 cases, and some of them produce 1,200 cases or 800 cases, and for the most part, the problems that the small wineries have, even a place that like Veritas is one of the largest in the state, they don't produce enough bottles of wine that they can go to Giant or Safeway or even Total Wine or Trader Joe's, which has stores all over the country, and get their wine sold in those stores, because they just can't guarantee they're going to be able to
meet the demand.
To meet the demand, or to be able to have enough that they can stock their shelves year round. Now, a lot of the small wine stores, and there's a bunch of them in Arlington and Alexandria and McLean, that will buy 2 cases of wine, and they'll put it on their shelf, and when that's gone, they'll put 2 cases of somebody else's wine in there. So if you go to small wine stores, sometimes you can find a lot of Virginia wines.
Interesting.
But I know that Total, for example, has 2 or 3 brands of Virginia wines that they carry regularly. They got Trump and Horton and Barbersville, and I think there may be one other there that they have occasionally.
Speaking of the names of these different wineries and everything, is Trump's winery going to need to change names now that he's been elected president?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think getting elected president just builds his brand that much more.
Okay, I have something to think about that.
I'm not sure how that works. Because there were some political people talking about a blind trust and so forth, and I know the winery, for example, he's got one of his sons or son-in-laws is running the winery, and I presume that a smart businessman would have a separate corporate entity set up for the winery, as in the hotels and the condos and so forth, so that legally they're all separate entities. In case one of them goes bankrupt, then it doesn't affect all the rest of them. But it's an interesting question. Maybe you get one of your political or legal analysts on here.
Exactly.
You can talk about that. It might be an interesting show. Yeah.
Just kind of interesting in regards to that. With the different things that are happening in wines, drinking by the alphabet, or seeing if you can drink the alphabet, what are some of the other things?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that I think it's a fun thing to try different kinds of wines. I mean, you can do your own kind of drinking through an alphabet if you just want to try getting Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc, Merlot, Pinot Noir. I mean, you can go to the bistro or the dining room and try 6 or 8 different kinds of wine. And if you want to go to Total or Trader Joe's or Safeway or Whole Foods, if you read through the labels, you could sit down and take a piece of paper with you with all 26 letters of the alphabet, and you could probably find 18 or 20 different grape varieties that are listed, because a lot of the bottles of wine will say on the back, made with Syrah, Grenache, Shiraz, Albarino,
so it has
and so
a different
forth.
kind of grapes that are in it.
That's right, and you could probably hit 20 or more of them without too much trouble. And if you wanted to try something like that, you could have a party, and everybody has to bring a wine that begins with the letter of their last name or something, something like that.
Yeah. But I think, speaking of that, I mean, people, the way they drink and different things and the different wine clubs that are around, it's no different than someone deciding, let's bring a wine from a state that we've lived in at some point, or bring a wine that you have never tried, you've always wanted to try.
Yeah, that's probably easier than if you've. I'm trying to think of some state, North Dakota or South Dakota, someplace. You may be rather limited if you spent your whole life there in what you could come up with. Yeah. But there's wineries in every state in the union. But finding a wine from Hawaii here in the D.C. area would be difficult. Yeah. You have trouble enough finding wines from Virginia in this state.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a problem. I was just thinking, with the small wineries, do they have to follow the same rules the big wineries follow, that they cannot sell their wine cheaper in a store than they sell it at the winery?
In Virginia, the law is that a winery has to sell their wine at the retail price. Okay. So if they say we're selling this wine for $50 a bottle, if you buy it at the winery, you've got to pay $50. They can sell it to a wholesaler or a middleman for less than that, and then they can mark it up and sell it to Total Wine or Trader Joe's or Giant or Safeway. And Giant or Safeway or Total can sell it for less than the retail price. Total usually sells most wines for less than the retail mark price, and yet in Virginia about 80% or more of the wine is sold out of the wineries because their retail marketing is so limited. They can't do that. But people that go there, and I know my wife and I would do this. We'd go to a winery and you taste the wines in their tasting room. And the one you like the best might be the one that's a rather small production, so they don't sell it retail. They only sell it at the winery. And so, but that helps the wineries in the sense that they don't have to have a marketing arm. They don't have to deal with transportation and so forth. But it does rather limit their ability to reach new customers. So it's a double-edged sword.
Okay. With the wine sales, and if you go to a restaurant and order a bottle of wine, you're paying what, 3 times what the retail price typically?
Depending on the restaurant, anywhere from 2 to 3, 3.5 to. I mean, not to pick on the president-elect, but if you go to Trump Towers to eat in one of the restaurants there, you might pay 4 times retail price. Especially if you're buying a relatively inexpensive mass-marketed wine that you might buy for $10 or $15 at a retail
street,
store.
yeah.
In a restaurant, you might pay $50 or $60 for that bottle of wine because they've got fixed costs for storage, handling, paying the sommelier, paying the server. The dishwasher probably makes more at a high-end restaurant than he does at the mom-and-pop restaurant or at Outback Steakhouse. All those expenses go into the
Pricing
into their markup on all their steaks, their vegetables, whatever. Which is another nice thing about living here at Green Spring. The markup on the wines that we buy in the dining rooms here are relatively modest compared to.
That's exactly where I was headed in regards to it, because I mean, there's basically an unwritten policy of only charging $1 or $2 above retail on it.
They charge enough to make the cost of washing the glasses or replacing broken glasses. Their staff costs are all fixed ahead of time. They know how much they're going to have to pay the staff, and they know what their rent and electricity and everything is going to be. So they're not depending on making it up on the. And wine is a big profit center for most restaurants. They say they make more on alcohol sales than they do on food sales at most restaurants. So for them, it's a big deal.
Yeah. With the price of wines and the number of restaurants that are out there and the different sommeliers that are involved, does a sommelier work for a particular restaurant, or do they work for a winery, or?
Well, in a restaurant, the sommelier works for the restaurant, but I have the impression that some of the sommeliers are independent contractors who as opposed to being hired by the restaurant, and so they contract with the restaurant to provide their services. And I know that because I've read some sommeliers are the sommelier at 2 or 3 restaurants, and then they have assistant sommeliers in each restaurant that works for them, and they go around and help make up the wine list, make sure that the sommelier staff is trained, and so forth. So because if you have a master sommelier certification, which very few people in the U.S. have, that makes you a desirable commodity, especially at a high-end restaurant in a place like New York or D.C. where they want to put your name.
Your salary in regards.
Exactly, yeah. You can make good money doing that.
Right. What else is happening with wines these days?
Well, there's not a lot exciting new happening, but of course we've got my favorite wine drinking season coming up here with the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, and people often will have their families over or go to their families, and they wonder, should I take a bottle of wine to grandma's or grandpa's?
Right.
And if they're my grandkids, I would say, heck yes. But it's a lot of people that aren't intimately familiar or don't really know a lot about it are a little uncomfortable buying wine, and I always give the same advice. If you're going to somebody's house and you want to take a bottle of wine, or if you're having friends and family over to your house for the holidays, there are some can't miss wines that you go with.
And they are?
And for white wine, it would be Chardonnay. For red wine, it would be Pinot Noir, because they're both very flexible wines. Now they are available in different styles. You get the red wines can be heavier and darker or lighter.
Or more tannic.
Or more tannic. The Chardonnays can be oaked or unoaked. So if you know that people have preferences, why you can read the label and it'll usually say. But and with oaked or unoaked simply means that they have an oak finish or oak taste. That's
or,
right.
Or
they're aged in oaked, so they get a little bit of a vanilla, and it makes it a little bit different taste to it.
And that's where some sommelier would come in handy to be able to tell you.
That's right. You usually in a retail store you can ask the clerk or ask the if they have a wine buyer there that works, you can ask them. The advantages of both of those wines are that they're so flexible. I mean, you can drink Pinot Noir with seafood because it's a light red. You can drink an oaky Chardonnay with a steak, and those two grapes, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, are in Champagne. They're in California Champagne, Australian Champagne. So both of those grapes go into the sparkling wine from France and Spain.
Okay.
No, not from Spain. Spain uses different grapes, but it's the same thing. They use grapes, local grapes that are similar to those. So sparkling wine, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are usually can't miss because they go with almost everything, and usually people are familiar with them because they're popular grapes anytime.
And so, for the holidays, then, sparkling wines, cavas.
Yeah, prosecco from Italy. Especially for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and for New Year's Eve, sparkling wine goes great because sparkling wine helps cut through the thick gravy, the sweetness of the because Thanksgiving usually you'll be having turkey.
Right.
Christmas maybe ham or turkey or a roast beef, and those grapes go great with all those. If you're having ham, also Riesling goes well. And as a substitute for Riesling, an inexpensive substitute for Riesling, I recommend California Chenin Blanc, which tends to be slightly sweet, the same as most Rieslings do. Chenin Blanc usually costs about half as much as Riesling. So you can take twice as much when you come to my house.
Very good. I'll remember that. Well, Jim, we're starting to run out of time here, and you've provided some real interesting information and statistics here this morning about wine, and we greatly appreciate that. Any words of wisdom you'd like to share with us?
Drink wine.
Okay.
It's good for your health, and it's a lot of fun. And if your doctor says you can't drink wine, you might want to try a non-alcoholic wine or try sparkling cider. And there's other drinks you can try that will be equally festive for the holidays, because after all, you're with friends and family, and you want to be in a good mood.
Right. And if you're having people over, always have a non-alcoholic beverage available as well. Okay.
And sparkling cider is good for that. I know there are some very good sparkling ciders, and there are some really bad ones, or you can just serve regular cider.
Yeah, right.
Or soft drinks or anything like that.
Very good. Again, Jim, thanks for going.
Oh, thank you. It's fun.
Thanks. Folks, don't go away. Have some announcements for you. And the very first one is Memory, Mood, Activity, and Longevity will be shown today at 2 and 8 p.m. So we encourage you to make sure you're tuned in at those times.